Have you ever walked onto a dealership lot and wondered if you'd accidentally wandered into some strange automotive graveyard filled with overpriced trucks that no one seems to want? You see row after row of brand new cars, their glossy paint jobs gleaming under the sun, but surprisingly few customers around to test drive them. Then you notice the window stickers, some flaunt six-figure prices, and others list MSRPs barely discounted from last year's model. It makes you ask yourself, who on earth is buying these things? Or more importantly, how are these dealerships getting away with it? Welcome to what might be one of the strangest moments in the modern car market, a time when dealership lots are overflowing with unsold inventory. Manufacturers keep pushing out new vehicles and everyone's pointing fingers as if it's someone else's fault. But there's more beneath the surface than just prices are high, buyers are scarce. The reality is a tangled web of oversupply, expensive add-ons, and desperate attempts to unload vehicles that seem destined to gather dust. Why are these lots so jam-packed with trucks and SUVs that cost more than some houses did a few decades ago? The short answer is that manufacturers keep producing, hoping their cars will sell at big markups. Meanwhile, dealers are caught in the crossfire, loaded with inventory they can't afford to hold for too long, especially now that interest rates on floor plans are no joke. Customers, on the other hand, are caught in an entirely different dilemma. Many have to decide whether they should shell out enormous monthly payments for a brand new truck that might lose half its value in a year, or settle for a used model that sometimes costs just as much or more. Add to that the constant flood of hype about rare models, limited availability, or brand new features, and you start to see how we got into this mess in the first place. Of course, this isn't the first time the automotive world has faced oversupply and inflated prices, but it's rarely been so dramatic. Walking onto a dealership lot nowadays, you might find 2023 model year vehicles parked beside 2024s, and if you look closely, you might even see a 2025 model creeping in, waiting to be sold. The strangest part? Many of those 2023s have barely been touched, and they're discounted by just a few $1,000s. It's a scenario that prompts a lot of questions. Shouldn't those older model years be heavily discounted by now? How can a year-old truck with thousands of miles on it still cost as much as a brand new version? And if a consumer is actually willing to buy one of those older models, why not throw in an even bigger discount to seal the deal? These mysteries might leave you scratching your head, but the truth is that dealerships are just as baffled. They're stuck with an avalanche of vehicles they can't move, yet many remain reluctant to slash prices drastically, fearing they'll lose thousands on each sale. The manufacturers, meanwhile, insist that demand will bounce back, or they quietly try to reel in MSRPs when they realize the market is shifting under their feet. But none of this addresses the bigger question. What happens to all these unsold cars if no one steps in to buy them? As we'll see, even layering on incentives doesn't always guarantee a mass exodus from dealership lots. Today, we're taking a deep dive into how this market meltdown came to be and exposing the surprising ways used vehicles, brand new leftover inventory, and even electric trucks are all caught in the crossfire. Keep watching, because by the end, you might just rethink whether it's worth rushing out to buy a new ride, or if you should wait until the entire system collapses under its own weight. And trust me, the situation is more complicated than just prices are high. There's a twist involving used vehicles selling at brand new prices, electric trucks depreciating at lightning speed, and certain manufacturers so overloaded that they're practically begging dealers to get these cars off their lots. But that's only part of the story. Let's move straight into the heart of the matter. The overflowing dealer lots crammed with fresh models that look shiny but have nowhere to go. Picture a sprawling Ford or Chevy dealership with rows of trucks so large you'd think they were built for an invasion of giants. You wander around and see price tags hitting the $100,000 mark, or even higher once you factor in certain lift kits or special edition packages. The wheels might sparkle and the interior might have enough tech to run a small command center, but these behemoths are going nowhere fast. Part of the reason is that interest rates have soared, making monthly payments jaw-droppingly expensive. Another reason, people's budgets simply haven't kept up with the automotive arms race. In a previous era, a fully loaded truck might have cost half that amount, but manufacturers and dealers kept pushing the envelope. Bigger engines, more gadgets, more luxury touches, and of course, bigger price tags. Now those trucks are collecting dust, sometimes discounted by a few $1,000s, but not nearly enough to lure most buyers. The shocking sight is the repetition. A couple of $100,000 monsters side by side, while you wonder whether the dealership staff is secretly hoping a lottery winner strolls in. Meanwhile, the 2024 models arrive by the truckload, literally, only to park alongside the leftover 2023s that never found a home. And just when you think you've seen it all, you spot the earliest shipments of 2025 versions. Yes, that's right, 3 generations of brand new trucks, all jostling for attention, often priced within a few $1,000s of each other. If you were a buyer with decent credit and you actually wanted one of these rigs, wouldn't you demand a massive discount on the older models? Yet dealers sometimes knock off just $5,000 or $6,000 from a 2023 that's about to celebrate its 2nd birthday on the lot. But don't think it's just the American brands facing this predicament. Some import dealers are also suffering from clogged inventories. Kia, for instance, saw massive popularity with models like the Telluride. Not so long ago, people were paying over sticker price for these SUVs. Now, you can find 2024 or even 2025 Tellurides fresh off the truck, plus some leftover 2023 models that still haven't budged. The same situation repeats itself in the Nissan corner. Rows of unsold sedans and SUVs, all priced competitively on paper, but effectively overshadowed by the next wave of incoming models. You might assume that a year-old new car, still technically brand new, but from the previous model year, should have a gigantic discount attached. Instead, you see something like a modest $2,000 or $3,000 reduction, which hardly feels like a bargain when these vehicles will soon be considered old the moment you drive them off the lot. And it's not just about leftover new cars. The used market, surprisingly, is also part of this bizarre puzzle. Next, let's examine how 1- or 2-year-old vehicles can sometimes cost nearly the same as their brand new counterparts, and why so many people end up accidentally paying too much. If you think paying $100,000 for a brand new truck is outrageous, try walking over to the used section of a dealership lot, or a well-known national used car chain, and checking the stickers on some popular models. You might find a 2-year-old SUV, complete with 20,000 or 30,000 miles on the odometer, listed at just a few $1,000s below the brand new version. Sometimes you'll discover it's even more expensive than a brand new version, especially when you factor in manufacturer incentives on the new models that used ones simply don't get. This becomes particularly absurd when you spot something like a small crossover or sedan priced at what you'd assume only a larger, more powerful vehicle should cost. One reason is that, during the peak of car buying frenzy not long ago, people were willing to pay premiums for slightly used cars to avoid waiting for new inventory. Supply chain issues and chip shortages meant new vehicles could take months to arrive, so dealers and used car retailers capitalized on the desperation. Prices soared, and now that the market has cooled, some dealers are stuck with used inventory bought at inflated wholesale prices. They don't want to sell at a loss, so they price them high, hoping someone will come along and bite. Sometimes a buyer who hasn't done their research strolls in, sees a nice used SUV, and thinks, well, this must be cheaper than a brand new one, right? They don't realize that a quick check online might reveal that a local dealership has a brand new version of the same model for less. This madness isn't exclusive to SUVs. Even mainstream sedans or hybrid cars have occasionally been listed over the manufacturer's suggested retail price for a new one. RAV4s, CR-Vs, you name it. During peak market craziness, these were fetching insane markups if they were hot models with decent fuel economy. The logic was that if you needed a car right now and didn't want to wait for months, you'd pay the premium. That desperation has faded somewhat, but the ripple effects linger. Dealers who overpaid at auction or took in high-value trades now risk losing serious money if they drop prices too fast, so they hold steady, waiting for a less savvy buyer. If there's a moral to this story, it's that you should always cross-reference the cost of a brand new vehicle if you're considering a used one of the same model. It only takes a few minutes of online research to see if the used option is actually overpriced. And if you were surprised by the notion of used cars selling at or above new car prices, prepare yourself for the next revelation: the dramatic freefall in value for certain electric trucks, most famously Ford's F-150 Lightning. When the F-150 Lightning hit the market, it caused a frenzy. People lined up to pre-order, fully expecting that electric trucks would be the next big thing. and dealers seized the opportunity to slap on hefty markups. Some early buyers ended up paying well over $100,000 for certain trims with extra features. At the time, it felt like a once-in-a-lifetime chance to own the future of pickup trucks, so a few folks didn't blink at those inflated prices. But fast forward a year or so, and things have taken a stark turn. You stroll onto a used car lot and see a Lightning, barely a year old, maybe 20,000 or 30,000 miles, listed for around $50,000 to $60,000. You do the math and realize that's about half of what someone might have paid for it brand new at the height of the mania. Why the abrupt plunge? Part of it is timing. The new and shiny excitement wore off, and the market adjusted to a more realistic view of what electric trucks should cost. Another factor is that competition is heating up, with more EV trucks from various automakers entering the scene, meaning Ford can't maintain sky-high prices. And let's not forget interest rates. EVs, especially trucks with big battery packs, aren't cheap. When financing becomes more expensive, fewer people qualify for loans on these pricey vehicles, reducing demand. Meanwhile, those who bought early at inflated prices are finding out the hard way that depreciation on an EV can be brutal, especially if the technology rapidly evolves or if gas prices don't stay as high as anticipated. You might wonder how dealers handle this whiplash. In some cases, they take trade-ins on Lightnings at a fraction of the original sticker price, then try to flip them for a profit on the used lot. If you see a used Lightning advertised at $53,000, you can bet the dealership probably paid even less to take it off the previous owner's hands. That leaves some early adopters feeling burned, having lost tens of thousands of dollars in equity in just 1 year. It's a cautionary tale about jumping into the hype of groundbreaking vehicles. Doing your research and waiting out the initial craze often pays off, literally. But don't think only electric trucks are in trouble. Other manufacturers like Nissan and Kia are also struggling to move their broader lineups, not just EVs. And that's where we come to the next puzzle piece of this market meltdown. Brands saddled with a backlog of unsold inventory, constant new shipments arriving, and deals that still aren't enough to move these cars off the lot. Walk into a Nissan dealership these days, and you might see a sea of sedans and SUVs gleaming under the fluorescent showroom lights, all with discount stickers on the windshield. Some might say things like $5,000 off or 0% APR for 36 months. That might look like a great deal at first glance, but step outside into the lot and you'll realize it's massive, filled with rows of brand new vehicles that never got sold when they were first delivered. Dealers sometimes grumble that Nissan or other manufacturers simply flooded them with too many cars, ignoring the warning signs that demand was cooling. Now, the dealership has to bear the cost of holding all that inventory. They pay interest, the floor plan cost, on every unsold car. The longer those vehicles sit, the more it costs the dealer, piling on the pressure to move them as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Nissan might quietly revise MSRPs for upcoming model years, lowering them in a bid to seem more competitive. But for the dealer, that just means the older model year vehicles look even less appealing if they haven't been deeply discounted, and so begins a downward spiral of confusion. Which year is truly the best deal? If the 2025 has a lower MSRP than the 2024 or 2023 that's still sitting there, why would anyone buy the older model unless the discount is huge? Many customers pick the brand new model year with a slightly higher final price just for the psychological perk of getting the latest thing, leaving older units to collect dust. Kia faces its own share of challenges. Not too long ago, certain Kia models like the Telluride were so hot that people were paying over sticker just to get one. Now, you might find dealers quietly adding market adjustment or appearance package fees, even as these vehicles pile up. If you walk directly onto the lot, you might not see a giant discount sign, but check their online listings. Sometimes they'll drop the price by a few $1,000s there, hoping to compete with rival dealers for your internet search clicks. Then when you show up in person, you realize they've also tacked on a range of add-ons, nitrogen for the tires, a paint protection kit, or some random security etching. Suddenly, that discount evaporates, and you might even end up back at or above MSRP. What's truly puzzling is that both Nissan and Kia have to push new shipments of 2024s or 2025s, while older 2023s remain unsold. The clock is ticking for dealers with these vehicles on their lots, and time is money they don't want to lose. But the final piece of the puzzle, which we'll examine next, is how dealerships themselves are coping behind the scenes. They're juggling rising interest costs, leftover inventory, and fewer qualified buyers because the banks have tightened their lending standards. This perfect storm is not something that simply goes away with a few holiday season promotions. Behind every flashy sale sign is a dealership manager or finance director sweating over spreadsheets, trying to figure out how to keep the doors open and the lights on. One major pressure point is floor plan interest. Put simply, dealerships don't usually pay for all those shiny vehicles in full. They finance them through what's called a floor plan, meaning they owe interest on each unsold car the longer it sits. It's similar to how a person pays interest on an auto loan, except dealerships do it on potentially hundreds of cars at once. In a stable market, vehicles move fast, and the interest costs are manageable, but in today's scenario, where many cars linger for months or even years, the interest payments can become crushing. Another angle is that lenders, banks, credit unions, or captive finance arms are tightening the criteria for who qualifies for a loan and how big that loan can be. With higher interest rates, monthly payments skyrocket for vehicles that are already expensive. That narrows the pool of potential buyers even further. The result? More unsold cars, more interest expense for the dealership, and a vicious cycle that's hard to break. Some manufacturers do step in with incentives, such as cashback offers, subsidized rates, or bonus deals to dealers. But these measures often feel like too little, too late, when the lot is already overflowing with last year's models. Meanwhile, many dealers feel let down by the manufacturers themselves. They argue that the automakers should have seen this coming and slowed production or lowered MSRPs much earlier. Instead, once the factories churned out a certain volume, it was shipped off to dealers, whether they wanted it or not. Now the dealer is left holding the bag, scrambling to cut prices enough to attract a dwindling number of qualified buyers, but not so much that they bleed cash. It's a high-wire act that often leaves both dealers and consumers frustrated. Dealers can't afford to be too generous, or they'll lose money on every sale. Consumers, on the other hand, see the huge supply of unsold cars and wonder, why am I not getting a better deal if they're so desperate? This tension will likely continue until the entire system finds a new equilibrium, fewer cars produced, more realistic MSRPs, or some combination of both. But there's one question that keeps popping up. What happens if interest rates rise even more, or consumer confidence takes another dip? We've watched how quickly a car's value can tank, especially in the used market. Imagine that on a larger scale, and you'll begin to see the potential ripple effects that could shake the entire auto industry. Next, we'll circle back to the bigger picture and see where all these trends might be heading. Here's the bottom line. The car market today is a cautionary tale of what happens when hype, production, and pricing get out of sync with actual consumer demand. We have dealers stuck with 2023 models that never sold, facing the arrival of 2024s and 2025s. We have electric trucks that once commanded six-figure price tags now selling for half of that amount on the used market. And we have entire rows of brand new vehicles sporting subtle or not so subtle markdowns, yet still gathering dust because shoppers either can't qualify for the loan or refuse to pay bloated prices. It's a paradox, massive supply yet tepid demand, at least at the current price levels. The biggest shocks we've uncovered include the surreal sight of 3 different model years on the same lot, each priced far too close to one another for comfort. Then there's the used car fiasco, where buyers unwittingly pay the same or even more for a pre-owned model than a fresh factory release would cost. And let's not forget the heartbreak of early adopters watching their electric trucks hemorrhage value in record time. All of this points to a larger standoff. Dealerships won't or can't cut prices enough to reflect the real market, and consumers aren't jumping to buy if it means being stuck with inflated monthly payments on an asset that might lose value quicker than expected. So where do we go from here? One possibility is that manufacturers will finally reduce MSRPs, or at least offer generous rebates to clear out old stock. Another is that dealers will come under intense financial pressure to move cars at deeper discounts just to reduce their floor plan costs. Yet there's also the chance that the market could settle into a bizarre waiting game where both sides hold out, dealers refusing to slash prices drastically, and consumers delaying their purchases until they see a real bargain. If interest rates climb even higher, this standoff could escalate. People may decide they'd rather keep driving their older cars than jump into a new or used model that's overpriced and expensive to finance. The real wild card is how banks will react in the coming months. Stricter lending criteria could freeze out yet more potential buyers, pushing dealerships further to the brink. Or if economic conditions soften, we might see a new wave of incentives from car makers anxious to prevent an industry-wide meltdown. In either case, your best move as a buyer is to stay informed, do your research, and keep a level head. Don't get swept up in the hype of a hot new model or a supposed scarcity. Often, a quick look at online listings from multiple dealers can tell you how competitive the market really is and whether the dealership's on-lot deal is as good as they claim. In the end, the automotive landscape might look very different a year from now if dealers finally capitulate and slash prices, or if automakers dial back production to realign with demand. But one thing is certain, we're living through a market standoff that might change how people buy cars for years to come. How long can these dealerships survive with so many unsold vehicles? At what point do manufacturers say, enough is enough, and scale down production? And how many buyers will simply choose to walk away from the entire mess, waiting for sanity to prevail? Those are the questions echoing across the country as each day brings more shipments of fresh inventory to lots that still haven't sold last year's cars. If you're thinking of buying a new ride, take this as a wake-up call. Always compare prices online and in person, check for hidden add-ons, and consider the real cost of financing. Because in a market as chaotic as this, the difference between a fair deal and an expensive mistake can come down to a single choice. If you've had your own run-ins with sky-high markups or leftover models gathering dust, share your story. We're at a tipping point in the auto industry, and every voice helps paint a clearer picture. Who knows? Maybe the pressure will force real changes, and someday soon we'll see a market where prices actually make sense. Until then, keep your eyes open, stay patient, and watch closely as the car market standoff continues to unfold.